All right. Well, friends, welcome back to the podcast. I am going to introduce you today to a friend of mine named Chandler Bolt. And so if you are watching on YouTube right now, Chandler, say hi to all of our YouTube watchers. But okay, so this is Chandler, who I met through the publishing world. So let me read just a little bit about his bio, which is just so impressive. Okay, hang tight. And I just need you guys to know right up front, I literally just asked Chandler, how old are you? He's 27. Like I literally could have a child your age. Do you realize that? So funny. Okay, here we go. Okay, so as you guys know, I launched Fear is Not the Boss of You in a traditional publishing style, but Chandler helps people who want to put a book out into the world and self-publish it, which is probably, Chandler, I'm supposed to be reading your bio, but now I just have questions. Is that the majority of the people? Do the majority of books, are they self-published?
Yes,
Okay.
for the most part. And now I think the stat is about 70% of author royalties are to self-published or non-traditionally published books. So definitely the people who are making the majority of the income, like actually they are making it are from self-published and hybrid published books. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Chandler is an investor. He's an advisor. He's the CEO of Self-Publishing School, the author of 6 best-selling books, 6, you guys, at age 27, including the most recent book called Published, which I love. Self-Publishing School is an Inc. 5000 company in the last 3 years in a row as one of the 5,000 fastest growing private companies in the United States. Were you just born a genius? That's really my question.
Hard work and great parents.
Hard work and great parents. Okay, so what did you think you wanted to do when you grew up?
Be an entrepreneur. I mean, my parents, they sent me to scout camp, and my mom loves to tell this story, but they sent me to scout camp with a bunch of snacks and drinks and all that stuff. And I came back with a pocket full of cash and a switchblade because I'd sold all my snacks. And so I think that was my foray into entrepreneurship, and then ran more businesses in high school and then more businesses in college, and then dropped out of college because I was tired of learning how to run a business from professors who had never ran a business, and that didn't make too much sense.
Were you going to college for business? Because our oldest son, Noah, is in college right now for business. And when people ask me, and hopefully Noah doesn't listen to my podcast, so we're good. But when people say, what's Noah going to college for? I say, well, I think he's going for a business degree, but right now I think we're just paying for experience, just college experience. We're just paying for him to experience life outside of our home. Because I don't think he's actually he's actually going to need the degree, because he too is built to be an entrepreneur. So you dropped out. And then I know you had a crazy 18 months happen right after you dropped out of college. Is that right?
Yeah. And actually, Jennifer, I'll touch on that real quick. So I think I agree. I think it's kind of ironic to have business degrees in college, because, most people learn how to run a business by actually doing it. But I do also think like the paying for the experience. So I dropped out at 2 years, and I'm so happy I went for those 2 years. Even though they didn't let me take any business classes for those 2 years, which was super frustrating because that's what I wanted to be there to do. But they put me through all these prereqs. So I kind of got the worst part of the college experience, but I'm still in terms of actually learning what I wanted to learn, but I'm still glad I did it. So dropped out of school, launched and published my first book right about that time. And I was studied abroad right before I dropped out. That was my mom's idea. To try to keep me from dropping out. She said, why don't you study abroad first? You've always wanted to do that. I said, all right, that's a great idea, but I'm going to drop out right. So that's kind of where it all started. So I'm studying abroad, and I write and publish my first book. It starts doing well. And
what was the first book on? What's the first book?
So it was productivity for entrepreneurs who struggle with work-life balance. So it was kind of, I ran a business in college. It was a exterior house painting business. So it's an internship through a company called Student Painters. They teach you how to run a business by painting houses. And so I did that. And that was the first time I'd hit 6 figures with the company. And then I was also a full-time college student. And so that was kind of, I wrote a book about that experience, then rolled into another book with my brother that was for charity. My brother plays bass in the Grammy-nominated rock and roll band called Need to Breathe. And so it was kind of, we did that one for charity, which was the 15 things our parents taught us growing up that we thought was normal. And then we got out in the real world and realized no one gets taught this stuff. And it was kind of his perspective as a musician, my perspective as a business guy.
Fascinating.
So we did that book. And that's when people started asking. So I dropped out of school knowing that I wanted to run a business, but not knowing it would be self-publishing school.
Okay.
people just kept asking, hey, how are you doing this? How are you doing this? How are you doing this? I get on the phone with them for 45 minutes and teach them everything I knew, and then say, hey, good luck, just for free, just to be a nice person. And then finally it's like, you can only get smacked in the face so many times.
You're like, wait a minute.
Look.
Yeah.
And that's when we realized, okay, hold up, there's something here.
We're sitting on
that led to starting self-publishing school.
Okay. So I know that you have some sort of a story back when you were first starting things that has to do with snowboarding. That is really a piece of the story here also. Would you want to share that with my listeners?
Yeah, so that was kind of the magic moment for me. So I was studying abroad in Austria. I'm snowboarding, and a friend asked me, he says, hey, I heard you did this book thing. Is the book, is it doing well? Yeah. And is it actually making any money? And that was the moment for me where I thought for a second, I said, actually, yes. Holy cow. Yesterday, while we were snowboarding, the book made $400. And that was kind of a moment for me where I'd done something that was actually successful, that people were buying this book all around the world in countries that I'd never even been to. And the book was making an impact. So this is what we talk about, leveraged impact, this concept. So with your book, right? Doing work once, and then that book goes on to impact hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even millions of people, right? And you did that work once. Yes. I mean, I just looked on Amazon. That book's got over 1,500 reviews. Unbelievable. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that, because you know what? That was not easy to, I mean, it takes let me just say, I've got a really awesome audience, Chandler. And so, they're going to, number one, a lot of them are going to want to talk to you about how to publish a book, but we just literally just kept asking, and my people kept showing up, and I'm so grateful. But it was harder to, it's harder to get reviews. Like now that I've wrote a book, I'm like, wow, this is a way harder process that I thought. So I'm so glad that you totally helped simplify that for people. So, okay. Your books have been on the bestsellers list. Tell us how this happens, because of course, if you're going to write a book, for anybody that's listening right now, who has a message, who has a story, who they feel like, God's got a book in them somewhere. I mean, of course, the dream is that it's going to hit a list somewhere, right? Some sort of a list. And so how did you do that? We want all of we want the 15 secrets, just like the 15 things you and your brother wrote about. No, I'm kidding. Sure. But give us some of your top tips on that.
Yeah. And so I'll kind of zoom out and then zoom in. And so zooming out, the list is nice, but it's not a have to have, right? I think people fixate on the list and they lose track of the impact that they're having with their book. But then also in some way, we always talk about, it's like books change lives. Books change the life of the reader that reads them, which I think is amazing. And there's someone, I call it the college dropouts approach to learning. It's like, I dropped out of school, but I acted like I was still in school, and I get my learning through books and things like that. But then the flip side is books change the life of the author in the process of writing and publishing it. And so I think that's an important component to remember.
I'm laughing because I'm like, there has never been more truth spoken on my podcast right there.
Well, we talked about this when you interviewed on the Self-Publishing School podcast. Yeah. It was like COVID hit, totally pivoted your book launch. And so it's like, that can be sometimes helpful to remember in the chaos of writing and publishing a book, right? Yeah. But then if we want to get in the weeds and super practical about launching books, is I think a lot of the things I learned from the scrappiness of student painters, and they would literally teach you, go door to door, knocking on doors and asking people, hey, do you need your house painted? And then I leveraged that, and then went into like local TV, and I said, hold up, well, how if instead of knocking on one door at a time, what if I got in the newspaper, and then that went into 30,000 homes or whatever in the county, and I can get more leverage. So I just kind of applied all those things with my first book, and I was 19 years old. I had no audience or anything like that. And so just scrappy kind of, there's involving people in the process. Yes. So getting them to vote on your cover, your title, things like that. There's the launch team concept, which is kind of, if you just do one thing, just do this, which is, pulling together a group of 5, 15, 50, maybe even more folks.
We had a good 100 people on my launch team, which was amazing. Yeah. Yes.
So now those are your ambassadors, right? Yeah. So those folks can leave a review on day one, which is huge. Yep. They can support the book and all that. So I could talk for hours on all the advanced, like post-launch stuff and somewhere books, but the launch team concept, and then one-on-one asking for reviews, like in its simplest form. And then there's the making sure that you have a good title, subtitle, cover. It needs to be clear. Your reader needs to instantly understand what the book's about. I love this. Fear is not the boss of you, how to get out of your head and live the life you were made for. Right. And so your audience instantly understands, is that for me or is that not for me?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. I had to fight for that title because that's not, what the nice thing about when you're self-publishing is you get to make a lot of those decisions on your own. Yes. When you're publishing a book in a traditional way, there are some things that are your hands are a little bit tight on. And so you said something a second ago that I wanted to ask you about. You talked about you didn't have an audience when you put your first book out. Do you need an audience to self-publish a book, or can self-publishing a book help you build an audience? Like, which way does that go?
Chicken or the egg, right?
Right. Yeah.
So absolutely having an audience helps, but I believe that you don't need an audience, and a book is the first and best step to building an audience. Okay. And at least that's my experience. So yes. I published my first book without an audience, and then it was kind of crazy. What happened is, I think within, it was 3 to 6 months, we had a 4,000 person email list, all from folks who had downloaded the book. And so then we had a problem of, hold up, we've got an email list with nothing to sell versus, beyond the book, versus most people have something to sell and not an email list. Right. So I'm a big fan of focusing on the book and using that as kind of a Trojan horse to enter a market or to build an audience or to build an email list. And then we always say, this is kind of cheesy, but I always say that a book is kind of like this key that opens the door to Narnia. It's like it opens this up this world that exists for published authors. And so I recommend writing the book and using it as a key to then, okay, now I can get on podcast interviews. I can get speaking gigs. Yes. I can build an email list. I can, like it kind of opens up all those things post book.
Yeah. Are you a huge fan of Narnia? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, me too. Okay, good. Okay, good. I love. In fact, we watched all 3 movies on Christmas Day this year with our kids again.
Yeah.
So
I literally tell that story on every webinar.
Do you?
Use that analogy. It's like, they discover this key that opens this door to this magical world that they didn't know existed. This is what happens for people who write books.
Sometimes we just walk around with that accent. Okay, so when you're talking about self-publishing a book, is it more of a moneymaker, or is it more of a almost social proof? Because it sounds good to have written a book. Which one is it more of, or can it be either? Can it be used for either, or is it both?
Yeah, I think it can be both, but I think it's important. Whether you're self-publishing or traditionally publishing, the majority of the money that you make will not be from the book, unless you're selling millions of copies. And so for me, more it's how do I use this book to as an authority builder? Mm-hmm. The root word of authority is author. and so
I hope you're saying that on every webinar
too. And so, it's building authority, but it's also, I look at it for me personally. Now, I know this won't be everyone, but if I'm thinking strategically to build my business, it's how do I get more leads, sales, and referrals using a book? And then specifically, leads are people who heard about me and wouldn't have heard about me without the book. Right. Sales are a higher percentage of people who know about me end up paying money to work with me. Yep. And then referrals are how do I integrate, for me personally, my book published, how do I give a copy or two to every new customer? And so that then I'm turning customers into active referrers, because they wouldn't give someone else a business card probably, but they would give someone else a book.
Ooh, that's a really good idea.
Using that book to drive referrals. And so I can unpack those 3 more, later in the interview if you'd like, but that's how I look at it. And that's how, my book published, for example, that brings in like a few $100,000 a year in revenue for self-publishing school, because we just integrate it into everything that we do. And it's kind of it's the fuel that drives a lot of the business growth.
Okay. So one of the reasons that I wanted you to be on the podcast is because I know I've done traditional publishing. You are self-published. For the people who are listening right now who want to write a book, will you just give them some of the biggest differences and why you love self-publishing? Because now that I've done traditional publishing, I can see, advantages definitely like anything to both. But I'd love to hear you just kind of do almost a little side by side verbally.
Absolutely. So there's 3 or 4 main differences. First one is distribution. And so it used to be that the only way to sell books was in bookstores. And you needed a publisher to get into bookstores. You needed an agent to get a publishing deal. Therefore, that was what you had to do, right?
Yep.
Now it's it's 70% approximately of all books sold are sold on Amazon, and you don't need a publisher to publish on Amazon. So there's been a shift for a lot of people away from traditional publishing towards self-publishing. And we kind of view what we're doing at self-publishing school as kind of like the Uber to the taxi industry. It's to the publishing industry. It's because there's this old outdated model. Everyone knows it. It's kind of weird. They're like, I feel like I'm getting taken advantage of. This feels a little slimy. Like, I don't really know what's going on. And we feel like we're providing an alternative in that way, but also Amazon is obviously, and other online book sellers. So distribution is first,
but Amazon is.
Amazon's the boss of everybody.
Amazon's the boss of everything.
Amazon, Apple, Google.
Exactly. I've got the book upstairs. I got upstairs.
3 or 4 bosses. But so distribution is the first thing. And then there's 3 other main ones. There's royalty rates. There's cost of actually publishing. And then there's the time that it takes to go through the process.
Yes.
So royalty rates, if you're traditionally publishing, you'll probably get between 8 to 12% per book. So we're talking $1, maybe
$1. Just figure $1 a book. Right. Yep.
Yeah. And then if you're self-publishing though, it's between 20 to 70% per book. Okay. So we're talking, $3 to $7, $8 a book,
Got it.
Depending on how it's priced and the format and all that stuff. So that's the difference in royalties. Then there's costs. Obviously, if you're working with a publisher, they're covering the costs for you in exchange for lower royalty rates. Then there's kind of hybrid publishing, which sits in the middle. Some people call it vanity publishing. And so that's where you'll pay often $5, $10, $20, maybe even $30,000 for someone to publish your book.
Okay.
And then there's self-publishing, which you're covering the costs yourself. Right. So the 3 main costs there, sorry, it's a really long answer.
That's okay.
Is cover design, formatting, and editing. And so those are your 3 main costs as
with
a
editing probably
author.
Being the biggest one, I would assume.
Yes. Editing being the biggest one. And so that can cost anywhere from a few thousand or, 5, 10, maybe more if you don't know what you're doing, or all the way down to a few hundred to a couple $1,000 if you do know what you're doing, and how to navigate that process. And so then that's the cost piece. And then there's the other cost, which not a lot of people consider, which is your time. So if you're traditionally publishing, it's probably going to take a minimum of 2 to 3 years to go through the process. And then if you're self-publishing, it might take, a year, it might take a decade, whatever that, however disciplined, like that is the benefit, right, of traditional publishing is you have that manuscript deadline.
Yes.
And so we see, I think it's exactly. So it's like they're holding you accountable. So I think on average, our students, it's 60 to 70% of them write and publish their book within 1 year.
Okay.
And so it kind of shrinks the timeline.
That's a great rate. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what do you think is the biggest thing that stops them from, like, the people that do self-publishing? What's the biggest thing that stops people from actually like getting it? Is it that they start, but they don't get it out? Is that what it normally is? Bada boom, bada bing. Okay.
Yeah. There's ding, ding, ding. There's 2 or 3. There's 2 or 3 things.
Okay.
The biggest one, in my opinion, far and away, is they don't get their rough draft done. Okay. And so the largest group of people, they haven't finished their rough draft. And then there's maybe a second subset, which is I finished my rough draft, but I'm terrified to publish it. And so I've just sat on it for years.
And by the way, that happens in traditional publishing as well. You're like, oh my gosh, I wrote it. And now I just think it's horrible and everything's horrible and it sucks and I suck. And what was I even thinking? So yeah, I mean,
it's like the creative journey, right? Yes. This is going to be amazing. Oh my gosh, this is awesome. This sucks. I suck. Why did I even do this? Wow, that was amazing. Yes. Right. And there's just that whole roller coaster of creativity. Yeah. But yes, it's those 2 things. And the big one is, so we only have 2 rules when we're working with people. Rule number 1 is that you can't edit while you write.
Okay.
Because we all know someone who has 5 perfectly written chapters in their unfinished book. Right.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. So if you're working on a draft, don't edit while you write. And then secondly, you can't write more than 1 book at a time, because try to catch 2 rabbits, you'll end up catching neither. Right.
Yep.
And so those are the 2 barriers to getting a rough draft done. And the rough draft is far and away the most important thing when you're starting, because when you get that rough draft done, you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And you start to believe that this is possible. And so that would be my advice for anyone who's thinking about going on this journey, is laser focused just on that and don't think about anything else until you get the rough draft done. And once you get the rough draft done, you'll start to actually believe, hey, this is something I can do.
Perfect. Okay. I know there's going to be somebody listening, Chandler, who's like, okay, so how then, like, let's say somebody was to, self-publish. How do you actually get a self-published book onto Amazon? Somebody's going to want to know just what, and I know that that's probably a huge question. But basically, how does that process work?
Yeah. So if we were looking at the whole process, right, there's coming up with the idea, there's writing a rough draft, then you're moving to kind of the production process. Okay. So that's editing, cover design, formatting. We kind of already talked about that a little bit. Yep. And then you're moving into the publish and launch phase. And so for the publish and launch phase, that's when you're coming in on, okay, what's my title? What's my subtitle? Right. What's my cover? The book description, the back cover, all those little kind of technical things. Yeah. And then you move into actually uploading it to Amazon, and then you upload it and then it's published. But some people associate like the publish with the launch, but you can publish a book on Amazon and not launch it. Right. And nobody still knows about it because you haven't announced it, right? Yeah. Exactly. So it's publishing and then launching as part of that. And so you're uploading, there's minutia like, picking keywords and categories so that you can get it to rank on Amazon. You can maximize your exposure. And then there's a bunch of little small things like that. Launch team is part of the launch. And then you roll into all the kind of post-launch marketing stuff. Okay. And so this is all of the sorts of things that you teach in self-publishing school, right? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Fabulous. If somebody wants to find out more about that, and I'm not done asking you questions yet, but where do they go to get more information on that? Because I know we're going to have people who do. There's a ton of people in my audience who have, stories, messages, something they feel like they need to share with the world. So absolutely. So if you Google anything about writing and publishing a book, you'll probably land on one of our sites. So you can go, we have selfpublishing.com. There's self-publishing school, all those things. Probably the simplest thing would be if you want to chat with the team about the process and all that stuff, go to self-publishingschool.com/apply. Okay. So it's 2021. True or false? Best time ever to launch a book? Best time, it's like planting a tree, right? Right. The best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. The second best time is now. Exactly. So that's how I look at it. Yeah. Because, it was interesting having launched a book last year. A lot of people said, oh, it was at the beginning of the pandemic. It's probably a great time for people to buy books. And I'm like, no, everybody all of a sudden was like, what is happening in the world? Everybody stop everything, including spending money. So in my head, I'm thinking, man, I almost wish we were launching now in 2021. Like in my head, I'm thinking, launch people, write, publish, like get those things out into the world. I also what are your thoughts on, physical hard copy of books or more digital formats? And I know these were not in our notes, but these are just questions I have because I'm nosy. Yeah, no problem. And honestly, for you, Jennifer, I think you were like the perfectly weird timing where it was like right as the pandemic was starting. I mean, within 10 minutes of the pandemic. It was wild. I know. But I even think for you, it would have been helpful to be 2-3 months later, because during lockdown, a lot of people were at home looking for ways to connect with people. And you're just so unbelievable at bringing people together. And so there could have been books, study groups and we did a bunch of book clubs, but it was still just the timing because we had a 12-city book tour and that was all canceled. And so the timing was bad, but for sure. But I mean, I still like a physical book. What do you like? Yes. Yeah, so that's my preference as well, physical and audio. And so my biggest advice to folks would be publish in all 3 formats. Okay. And sometimes you can sequence it. Like sometimes it can be overwhelming to do all 3 at once. Mm-hmm. And so what we actually recommend for a lot of folks is they launch ebook first, then print second, then audiobook third. And the benefit of that is you get 3 different book launches if you choose to do it that way, and it's more approachable. And so that's what I recommend. I love print books. This is the one I'm reading right now, Beyond the Cloud, about Salesforce. But I'm a print book and audiobook person. Yeah. And so example, right? If you just had an ebook, I would not buy and read that book. Right. And so you open up new markets when you publish all formats. And for a lot of people, audiobooks are, and especially for, for your audience or for other people who have podcasts and things like that, it's an easy segue. I already listen to podcasts. Yes. I can substitute that with listening to your book. I will buy your book. And then as an author, you're going to make more royalties because there's higher royalty rates on audiobooks, as well as not a lot of people know about this, but it's like an Amazon bounty. So say I sign up for Audible, like the monthly thing, and your book was the first book that I bought. And this could just be randomly, or you could have said, hey, buy my book through this link or whatever. Okay. I think as soon as I sign up for Audible, Amazon and your book was the first book I purchased, whether you did that or they did that. Right. Yeah. Amazon gives you, and they keep changing the amount, but it's like 50, 75, $100. And so every month for me, it's like, I get a few $100 just from Audible bounties, just because I have an audiobook. So it's just another stream of income. Okay. Yeah.
You are so brilliant in the whole area of self-publishing. So thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge. And I literally, as you were talking, I was like, okay, I really wish my son Noah would listen to this podcast. Except I talked about his college experience at the beginning, but I love that. I just like, I can't imagine like what God's got in store for you, Chandler, at your young age, like, cause you already know so much about this world, you know, in terms of the publishing, and you've already got 6 books out there. And so big high five to you. And so friends, if you want to find Chandler online, you can go to his website. Where do you like to play for social media, Chandler? Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat? TikTok.
Yes. So it's so funny, Jennifer, you were like 15 times better at social media than I am. And so I'm only on Facebook. I don't have anything else. And so that's where I hang out. But I should probably take some notes from how you're on social media, because it's really awesome.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. And friends, go find Chandler online, tell him hello on Facebook, and also make sure you check out Self-Publishing School at selfpublishingschool.com. Chandler, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me.